Shri Krishna Storybox.
In an age where religion had become pride and compassion was slowly fading from society, 4 innocent children walked into history. With no kingdom, no army, no worldly power, yet saints bowed before them. But who were these children? Why did society fear these children? Rejected by the world, then who guided them? Yet, wherever they walked, miracles followed. Do you want to know what happened in Alandi, Paithan, Nevase, and Pandharpur? Then travel with us back to the 13th century, where the footsteps of 4 divine siblings awakened humanity itself. This is the journey of the divine siblings.
Mauli, 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 Panduranga Vitthala Mauli.
In the sacred land of Maharashtra, on the serene northern banks of the holy Godavari River, near the ancient spiritual town of Paithan, stood a humble village known as Abekan. For generations, the forefathers of the great saint Sant Dnyaneshwar served as the hereditary Kulkarni of this village, keepers of records, guardians of duty, and respected pillars of society. The lineage passed from one noble soul to another, Haribant, then Ramachandrapant, followed by Gopalpant, and later Ramachandrapant. Each generation faithfully carrying the sacred responsibility of their ancestors. Then came Trimbakpant. He was blessed with 2 sons, Haripant and Govindapant. At that time, the kingdom was ruled by King Jaitrabal. To suppress a rebellious Dechmukh, Trimbakpant's brave young son, Haripant, was sent into battle. The battlefield thundered with swords and cries of war. But fate had written another destiny. In the chaos of combat, through cruel misfortune, Haribant was slain. the devastating news shattered the heart of Vitthalpant. The grief of losing his beloved son burned away all attachment to worldly life. From that moment, his heart belonged only to God. Then, one sacred day, destiny arrived at Abeghan itself. The great Nath yogi, Gorakhnath, while traveling on pilgrimage, visited the village. Seeing the spiritual fire hidden within Vitthalpant, the great master initiated him into the Nath tradition and accepted him as his disciple. That moment changed the destiny of an entire lineage. Vitthalpant became the first person in the family to walk the path of deep spirituality and divine realization. After the spiritual transformation of Vitthalpant, the divine lineage continued through his younger son, Govindapant, and to him was born Vitthalpant. From childhood itself, Vitthalpant possessed a rare spiritual nature. At the tender age of 7, his sacred thread ceremony was performed. Soon after, he immersed himself in the Vedas, the Shastras, and spiritual wisdom. But worldly life never attracted him. His heart longed only for devotion, pilgrimage, and God. With his father's blessings, young Vitthalpant began a sacred journey across Bharat. He traveled through Dwaraka, Prabhaspadan, Sabdasrungi, Trimbakeshwar, and Bhima Shankar. With every pilgrimage, his devotion deepened. And finally, his footsteps led him to the sacred town of Alandi. There lived a noble person named Sitobant. The moment Sitobant saw Vitthalpant's character, humility, and spiritual brilliance, he felt that this young pilgrim was the perfect husband for his daughter. And thus, his virtuous daughter Rukminibai was given in marriage to Vitthalpant. But even after marriage, the call of pilgrimage did not leave him. Together they journeyed through the sacred South Indian kshetras, Sri Sailam, Tirumala Venkateshwara, Ramanatha Swami Temple, and Gokarna. The couple finally returned to Alandi and later traveled to Abeghan along with Rukminipai's parents. There, Vitthalpant humbly bowed before his aging parents and began living with them. And with the passing of time, Vitthalpant lost both his father and mother. The burden of the entire household fell upon Vitthalpant. Yet his mind was never tied to worldly life. Even while living amidst family responsibilities, his soul remained absorbed in spirituality, in silence, in divine contemplation. Household affairs no longer attracted him. He remained detached, lost in philosophical thought and devotion. Seeing this growing indifference to worldly duties, Rukminipai became deeply concerned. Unable to bear the situation alone, she informed her parents in Alandi. Soon, her parents came to Abeghan, and with love and concern, they brought their daughter and son-in-law back to Alandi. Even while living in Alandi, Vitthalpant's heart was never at peace with worldly life. Again and again, he would tell his wife, Rukmini that a powerful longing was rising within him, a longing to renounce everything, to travel to Kasi and become a sannyasi. Many times he requested her permission. But how could a devoted wife allow her husband to abandon family life? So Rukmini refused. Days passed, but the fire of renunciation within Vitthalpant only grew stronger. Then one early morning, Vitthalpant quietly left home, telling Rukmini that he was going to the river for a bath. But that day, he never returned. Leaving behind worldly life, he walked toward Kasi. In the sacred city of seekers and saints, Vitthalpant came under the guidance of Swami Ramananda. There, he lived a life of strict celibacy, silence, and spiritual discipline. Slowly, he revealed his desire to the great master. He told Swami Ramananda that he was alone, that he had no bondage of wife or children, and with deep humility, he begged the master to initiate him into sannyasa. Believing his words to be true, Swami Ramananda accepted him as a disciple. He gave him sacred mantra initiation, and from that moment, Vitthalpant was reborn as the sannyasi, Chaitanyasramam. Somehow, the news of Vitthalpant's sannyasa reached the ears of Rukmini Bai. But she did not break down. Her faith in God remained unshaken. Day after day, year after year, she continued her prayers, her devotion, and her worship, as though nothing had changed. 12 long years passed in this way. Then, one evening, as usual, Rukmini went to the Marudi temple. There, she saw a saint radiating extraordinary spiritual brilliance. With deep reverence, she bowed before the Swamiji, and the saint blessed her. May you be blessed with a son. Hearing those words, Rukmini could not help but smile sadly. Seeing this, Swami Ramananda gently asked her the reason for her smile. With folded hands, Rukmini narrated her entire story, how her husband had left for Kasi, how he had accepted sannyasa, and how motherhood was now impossible for her. As Swami Ramananda listened, a sudden realization flashed through his mind. The sannyasi, Chaitanyasramam, whom he himself had initiated years ago, was none other than Vitthalpant. At that moment, the Swamiji was filled with deep sorrow. He realized that by blindly trusting the words of Vitthalpant, an innocent woman had suffered for years, deprived of the joys of married life, Without wasting a single moment, Swami Ramananda decided to abandon his southward journey. And together with Vitthalpant and Rukminipai, he immediately began the journey toward Kasi. After reaching Kasi, Swami Ramananda called for his disciple, Sant Dnyaneshwar. In silence, the great master placed the entire truth before him. Hearing everything, Vitthalpant could hide it no longer. With deep remorse, he confessed the truth and expressed sorrow for giving a false account at the time of taking sannyasa. The Swamiji was deeply displeased. He firmly reprimanded Vitthalpant and commanded him to abandon his sannyasa. Return to your rightful duty and begin your family life once again. For a true disciple, the Guru's word was sacred. And so, with complete obedience to his Guru's command, Vitthalpant renounced his ascetic life. Together with Rukminipai and his father-in-law Siddhobant, he returned once again to Alanti. As time passed, divine destiny slowly unfolded within the house of Vitthalpant and Rukminipai. In 1273, their first son was born. He was named Nivruttinath. 2 years later, another radiant child was born, Gnaneshwar. Then came Sopandev. And finally, the youngest among them all, Muktabai. But these were not ordinary names. Vitthalpant, through the names of his children, had hidden a deep spiritual path. When a soul turns away from worldly attachment, it attains Nivrutti, detachment from the material world. From detachment arises Jnana, true spiritual wisdom. And through true wisdom, one discovers the Sopan, the bridge leading toward liberation. And finally, the soul attains Mukti, eternal freedom. As though guided by divine insight itself, Vitthalpant had revealed the entire path to moksha through the sacred names of his 4 children. In Alandi, the villagers and the Orthodox priests rejected Vitthalpant and his family. Because after accepting sannyasa, he had once again returned to married life. To society, this was an unforgivable violation of religious law. And so, at the sacred river Ghats, Rukminipai and her children were not even allowed to touch the main stone steps where others collected holy water. People feared that their very presence would pollute the river. And so, the helpless mother and her little children were forced to walk far away toward muddy, isolated riverbanks far from society. Barefoot, under the harsh sun, they carried heavy clay pots through rough and difficult paths just to bring water home. But their suffering did not end there. Sometimes, when the children bent down to fill their tiny clay pots, cruel villagers would throw stones at them. The pots would shatter instantly, water spilling into the mud, while the frightened children stood trembling in tears. Little Muktabai would cling tightly to Rukminipai's sari in fear. Women mocked the helpless mother, calling her sinful and unworthy, while the innocent children silently endured pain they could never understand. Since the villagers of Abegan continued to reject their family, Vitthalpant and Rukminibai left the village behind. On the quiet banks of the Godavari River, far from society's harsh judgment, they built a small, humble home and lived in peace. Though society rejected them, Vitthalpant refused to let darkness consume his children's future. A deeply learned scholar himself, he became their teacher, their guide. Inside their small, humble home, he taught them Sanskrit, the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the sacred Bhagavad Gita. He revealed to them the hidden wisdom of Sanatana Dharma, the power of mantras, meditation, and spiritual discipline. Though the world denied them education, their father transformed them into souls of divine wisdom. Under the loving care of Vitthalpant and Rukminibai, the four children grew in devotion, wisdom, and spirituality in Alandi. To escape the cruelty of society and seek peace in God, the family journeyed toward Trimbakeshwar, near Nasik. One evening, while walking around the sacred Brahmakiri hills, a terrifying tiger suddenly leaped onto their path. Panic spread instantly. In fear and confusion, the family scattered into the dark forest. And amidst the chaos, 10-year-old Nivruttinath became separated from his parents and siblings. Alone, terrified, and lost in the wilderness, the young boy ran desperately up the slopes of Anjaneri mountain. There, he discovered a hidden cave and slipped inside to escape the tiger. But destiny had brought him there for another reason. Inside the cave sat the great Nath yogi, Kahininath, the direct disciple of Koraknath himself. He was a master of the ancient Nath tradition, a sacred spiritual path that taught mastery of the mind and body through yoga, meditation, and inner realization. The great master saw a divine light within the frightened child. Instead of turning him away, he welcomed him with compassion, comforted him, and protected him. For 3 sacred days, Nivruttinath remained inside the cave under the guidance of Kahininath. There, the young boy was initiated into the secret wisdom of the Nath tradition, sacred yoga, divine mantras, and deep spiritual knowledge. And before sending him back, Kahininath gave the child a divine mission to spread love, devotion, and bhakti to the world. Nivruttinath finally returned home safely. Seeing him alive, the entire family rushed forward and embraced him with tears of joy. Seated at the center, Nivruttinath, with a soft divine glow upon his face, the young child began speaking about Swamiji, Kahininath, and the sacred cave. Hearing about the Guru's blessings, Vitthalpant felt overwhelmed with joy, while the entire family listened in wonder and devotion. As years passed, Nivruttinath reached the age for his sacred thread ceremony. With hope in his heart, Vitthalpant approached the Brahmins, requesting them to perform the ritual. But the orthodox priests strongly refused. To return to family life after accepting sannyasa is against the Shastras. Again and again, Vitthalpant pleaded before them, begging them to suggest some atonement for his mistake. But the hearts of the orthodox Brahmins did not soften. All of them finally delivered a terrifying judgment. If Vitthalpant wishes to be freed from this great sin, he must sacrifice his life at the sacred confluence of the Ganga and Yamuna. The verdict struck like a thunderbolt. Hearing those cruel words, Vitthalpant stood silent and shattered. That night, while Rukmini and the children slept peacefully, Vitthalpant made his decision. Without a word, he quietly left the hut and began his lonely journey toward Prayag. A short while later, Rukmini awoke. Realizing that Vitthalpant was gone, without hesitation, she followed him through the darkness. At Prayag, standing before the sacred waters, Vitthalpant prepared to offer his life. Just as he stepped forward, a voice cried out behind him, "Stop!" It was Rukmini. Breathless from her journey, she rushed to his side. With tears in her eyes, she asked, "Why did you leave without telling me?" Then, Vitthalpant revealed the terrible verdict. "The Brahmins have declared that only my death can remove this sin. I came here so that you and the children might one day live with honor." Hearing this, Rukmini was heartbroken. She gently held his hand. "Where you go, I will go. If this sacrifice must be made, we shall make it together." The grief-stricken couple realized As long as they remained alive, their innocent children would continue to suffer, live as outcasts, and face rejection from society. And so, accepting it as God's will, they made their final decision. With faith in their hearts, they prayed, "Lord Vitthal will protect our children." There, at Prayag, where the sacred Ganga and Yamuna meet, with tears in their eyes, Vitthalpant and Rukminibai offered their lives to the sacred waters. At sunrise, little Muktabai called for her mother, but only silence filled the home. Hearing her cry, Nivruttinath, Gnaneshwar and Sopandev searched everywhere, with fear in their hearts. Nivruttinath quietly became their strength. Then, through deep meditation, he realized a divine truth. Showing Lord Vitthal and Goddess Rukmini, he softly said, "From today, they are our father and mother." Time has a painful way of teaching strength. And for the children of Vitthalpant, that burden fell upon young Nivruttinath. Though his heart was broken, he hid his grief and stood like a protector for his younger brothers and little sister. Hoping to find kindness, he traveled to Abegan, seeking help from his father's relatives. But one by one, every door closed before the helpless children. In the absence of Vitthalpant, the world gave them only rejection and silence. With nowhere left to go, Nivruttinath and young Gnaneshwar began begging for alms, struggling each day simply to survive, while carrying unbearable sorrow deep within their hearts. The very next day, Nivruttinath felt deep within his heart that his younger brother needed spiritual strength to face the suffering life had placed before them. And so, when Sant Dnyaneshwar was only 8 years old, Nivruttinath initiated him into the sacred Nath tradition. He taught the young boy Hatha Yoga, deep meditation, and the eternal truth that God lives inside every human being. But before the sacred ritual ended, Nivruttinath gave his little brother one divine mission. Use this wisdom to help ordinary people find God. That night, after deep thought and prayer, Nivruttinath made a decision. Tomorrow, we will begin our journey to Alandi. Rejected by society and abandoned by their own relatives, the 4 little children left Abegan with nowhere to go, barefoot, tired, and heartbroken. Nivruttinath, Gnaneshwar, Sopandev, and little Muktabai walked toward Alandi. They hoped that in Alandi, where their mother's relatives lived, they might finally find support. The journey was long, nearly 230 kilometers. Day after day, the 4 young children walked dusty roads, crossed fields and villages, and endured hunger, exhaustion, and uncertainty. Yet they did not stop. With faith in God and hope in their hearts, they continued their journey. Until at last, after many days of walking, the 4 siblings reached Alandi. But even there, people pointed at them, shouted at them, and rejected them as outcasts. Each cruel word pierced young Gnaneshwar's heart. Unable to bear the pain, he quietly walked back home, entered a small hut, and locked the door behind him. During that painful moment, though she was only a very young child, Seeing her brother's pain, little Muktabai began to sing the famous Song of the Door. The sacred Tartiche Abank, her gentle voice carried words of compassion, wisdom, and divine comfort. Calling softly, "Open the door, dear brother."
संत जेणे भावे जग बोलणे सहावे संत जेणे भावे जग बोलणे सहावे तरीच अंगी थोरपण जया नाही अभिमान तरीच अंगी थोरपण जया नाही अभिमान थोरपण जेथे वसे तेथे भूतदया असे थोरपण जेथे वसे तेथे भूतदया असे रागे भरावे कवणाशी आपण ब्रह्म सर्वदेशी रागे भरावे कवणाशी आपण ब्रह्म सर्वदेशी देशी समदृष्टी करा ताटे उघडा ज्ञानेश्वरा देशी समदृष्टी करा ताटे उघडा ज्ञानेश्वरा ताटे उघडा ज्ञानेश्वरा योगी पावन मनाचा साही अपराध जनाचा योगी पावन मनाचा साही अपराध जनाचा विश्वरागे झाले वन्ही संती सुखे भावे पाणी विश्वरागे झाले वन्ही संती सुखे भावे पाणी शब्दशस्त्रे झाले क्लेश संती मानावा उपदेश शब्दशस्त्रे झाले क्लेश संती मानावा उपदेश विश्वपट ब्रह्मदोरा ताटे उघडा ज्ञानेश्वरा विश्वपट ब्रह्मदोरा ताटे उघडा ज्ञानेश्वरा ताटे उघडा ज्ञानेश्वरा ताटे उघडा ज्ञानेश्वरा
The youngest child in the family became the teacher, and the grieving brother found strength once again. One day, Nivruttinath wished to eat Monday, a traditional Maharashtrian flatbread, and little Muktabai happily went to the village to buy a clay baking plate. But a proud Brahmin, Vichobasati, stopped her, forbidding anyone from helping the saintly siblings. Heartbroken, Muktabai returned home in tears. Seeing their little sister cry, Nivruttinath and her brothers gently comforted her. Then Gnaneshwar smiled and said, "Do not worry, Mukta. Prepare the dough." Through his divine yogic power, he awakened the sacred inner fire within himself. His back became a blazing furnace, and before everyone's astonished eyes, Muktabai baked the Monday directly on Gnaneshwar's red-hot back. Witnessing this incredible miracle, Vichobasati's pride vanished. Overwhelmed with remorse, he fell at the young saint's feet and begged for forgiveness. And with boundless compassion, Gnaneshwar forgave him. The miracle changed everything. The proud Vichobasati, who once mocked the saintly siblings, returned with a humbled heart. One day, as Nivruttinath, Gnaneshwar, Sopandev and little Muktabai sat peacefully beneath a tree, Vichobasati approached them, no longer arrogant, no longer filled with pride. With tears in his eyes, he bowed before the four siblings and sought their forgiveness. Touched by their compassion and wisdom, his life was transformed forever. After surrendering to Sant Dnyaneshwar, he was initiated into the sacred Nath tradition. Leaving behind his old identity, he became known as Vichoba Kechar. Clad in the simple robes of a Nath yogi, he dedicated his life to spiritual practice and devotion. Just as he had initiated young Gnaneshwar a little earlier, Nivruttinath now wished to initiate his youngest siblings as well, Sopandev and little Muktabai. He knew that the only way to protect them from poverty, rejection, and suffering. So, in their humble hut on the outskirts of Alandi, Nivruttinath initiated Sopandev and Muktabai into the sacred Nath tradition. Placing his hands gently upon their heads, he transmitted divine spiritual power and bestowed upon them the sacred name of Lord Vitthal. He taught them to rise above hunger and pain, to see God in every living being, and to remember that they were not helpless children. Days passed in this way, filled with hardship, rejection, and uncertainty. Then one day, young Gnaneshwar heard about Paithan, the great seat of learning, where respected Brahmins and scholars lived. And deep within his heart, a hopeful thought arose. Perhaps the learned Brahmins of Paithan will finally recognize our purity and give us the acceptance we seek. Determined to prove their purity, Nivruttinath, Gnaneshwar, Sopandev, and little Muktabai began the long journey to Paithan, walking barefoot through hunger, hardship, and danger. Would these young children safely reach the great city of Paithan? Would divine grace protect them along the way? And when they finally stood before the learned Brahmins, would their innocence and spiritual greatness be recognized? Or would they face another painful rejection? Their most remarkable chapter is about to begin. The story takes an unexpected turn. See you in the next part.